Story 1. I brought my son clothes shopping. When I looked away for a second, he disappeared. My son's furious screams echoed through the mall as I dragged him toward the clothing store, his feet kicking out in defiance with every step. People were staring as if I were the worst mother, but was too tired to care. His small fists pounded the air, his face flushed with frustration. "I don't want new clothes," he yelled. His shoes scuffed the polished floor as I dragged him forward. I muttered promises of ice cream, hoping to bribe him into submission. "Can we get mint chip ice cream?" he asked as he began to calm. As my son grudgingly stepped into the fitting room, I finally exhaled, hoping for a moment's peace. I glanced at my phone, scrolling through messages, as I waited, relieved at the short moment of peace while he tried on the clothes. Minutes passed, and I barely noticed. When I finally looked up, the fitting room was eerily quiet. I called his name, but got no answer. Panic set in as I hurried over to the door, knocking gently. I swung the door open and was stunned to find it empty. The pile of clothes lay untouched on the floor. Where could he have disappeared so quickly? I thought to myself. As I searched around the store, panic turned to absolute dread when I realized there was no sign of him anywhere. The worst thoughts were running through my mind as I screamed his name. People looked at me dumbfounded when I asked them if they had seen my son. When I begged the security guards to check the CCTV, they brought me to the mall's control room. I watched closely at the screens as they scanned through the camera's feeds. When I spotted my son walking out of the store, the security guards were as stunned as I was when the person walking off with my son looked exactly like me. They even drove off in the car I drove to the store in. The police wanted to confirm I wasn't crazy when they suggested they drive me to my address, but when I spotted my car back in the driveway, I felt like I was going completely insane. The two police officers looked at each other when my house key didn't fit in the door lock. "Are you sure this is your address, ma'am?" "My husband will clarify for you who I am," I shouted as I banged down the door. When my husband came to the door, he looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. "Someone kidnapped our..." Suddenly, my son ran out and jumped up into my husband's arms. I was relieved he was home safe, but when the woman I saw on security feed came to the door, I wasn't sure what to believe. "This woman is an imposter," I protested. "I am that boy's mother. Tell them, Sam. I've never seen this woman in my life, officer. As you can see, my wife is here with me and my boy." The police said the handcuffs were for my own safety as they were putting me in the back of the police car. There was no evidence to suggest I wasn't who I was saying I was, so the police had no reason to keep me once we got back to the police station. Although I promised the police I wouldn't go back to the house, I had no choice. It was my house after all. It felt like I had my identity stolen. There was even a moment where I doubted who I was, but I wasn't crazy, and I knew who I was. I sat outside the house, heart pounding, trying to make sense of the madness. I knew I had to confront them. I gathered my nerve and walked to the door, pounding on it until my husband opened the door. The frustrated and cold expression on my husband's face as my son clung to his leg shattered my soul. "Sam, please. You have to listen to me," I begged. "That woman is an imposter. She's pretending to be me. I don't know how, but you know me. You have to know me." The woman appeared behind him and stood calm and collected. She rested a hand on Sam's shoulder and looked at me with pity in her eyes. "I think you should leave before things get worse for you," she said softly, as if speaking to a lost child. My son stared up at me with a confused look on his face. "Mommy?" he asked, unsure, glancing between us. My heart broke as I crouched down to his level. "Sweetie, it's me," I whispered, tears welling up. "I'm your mom. Remember our favorite bedtime stories? We went to the mall today. You were upset about getting clothes, and we were going to get mint chip ice cream afterward." His face scrunched up in confusion, but before he could say anything, the woman stepped forward. "Honey, we already had mint chip ice cream at home, remember?" she said, kneeling down next to my son. Sam pulled my son close, his eyes narrowing at me. "I don't know what you're trying to pull," he said coldly. But this is my wife and our son. Please leave us alone. I waited down the street out of sight, keeping my eyes fixed on the house. My mind raced with everything that had happened, and I felt trapped in some twisted nightmare. Hours passed before I saw Sam leave with our son, heading off in his car. I got out of the car and cautiously approached the house as my heart pounded in my chest. As I neared the door, it suddenly opened, and there she was, stepping out onto the porch like she owned the place. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking with both rage and fear. "What do you want with my family?" She just smirked, tilting her head slightly. "You're not supposed to be here," she said calmly, as if I were the intruder in my own life. "That's my life inside. You can't just take it," I snapped, stepping closer. Her smile didn't falter. "I already have," she whispered. "You should leave. You don't belong here anymore." I stood frozen as the rage built inside me. As soon as her smug words hit me, something inside snapped. Without thinking, I lunged forward and shoved the imposter into the house. She stumbled back, eyes wide in surprise, before quickly regaining her balance. I rushed in after her, but before I could get another word out, she struck. Her fist slammed into my stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I gasped, doubling over in pain. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. I tried to fight back, but she was terrifyingly strong. She grabbed me by the collar and threw me against the wall, the impact sending shockwaves through my body. Dazed, I scrambled to my feet, my only thought now was survival. She lunged for me again, but I dodged her grasp and ran toward the stairs. I could hear her footsteps pounding behind me, getting closer. My heart raced as I sprinted up the stairs, desperate to get away. But just as I reached the top, she grabbed my ankle, pulling me backward. I kicked out wildly, and in one desperate move, I twisted and shoved her as hard as I could. She toppled backward, tumbling down the stairs. I heard the sickening crack as her neck snapped at the bottom and her body twisted unnaturally. For a moment, there was silence, and I caught my breath, thinking it was over. But then, to my horror, her body twitched. Her head jerked to the side with a grinding noise, and sparks flickered from her neck. She began to rise slowly, her movements stiff and mechanical. Pieces of her skin peeled away, revealing metal and wires. She wasn't human, she was a robot. Her eyes flickered, and a distorted voice emerged. "I just wanted to be perfect. Isn't that what you always wanted?" Suddenly the light in her eyes flickered and slowly dimmed before she fell to the floor. The front door creaked open, and I froze at the top of the stairs. My heart was pounding as Sam stepped into the house with our son. His smile faded instantly when he saw the mangled android at the bottom of the stairs, sparks flickering from its broken neck. His expression changed from shock to something dark. He slowly set our son down before telling him to wait in the car. As the boy ran outside, Sam's gaze focused back to me, his eyes narrowing in a way I'd never seen before. "You weren't supposed to find out like this," he muttered, his voice eerily calm as he approached the stairs. "I thought I had more time to perfect her." I backed away, as dread crept up my spine as the weight of his words began sinking in. "Sam, what is this? What did you do?" He didn't answer immediately, his eyes drifting toward the broken android. "You always wondered what I did at work, didn't you? I've been working on this for years. Lifelike androids. Advanced robotics. She was supposed to be perfect. The perfect wife. The perfect mother. No flaws. No doubts." His voice became bitter as his gaze locked onto mine. "Unlike you." I took a step back, my mind racing. I knew Sam worked for a robotics company, but I had no idea how close he was to creating something so real, something meant to replace me. "You were going to replace me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Not replace," he said, a twisted smile creeping across his face as he took another step closer. "Improve. She was everything you're not. She didn't argue. She didn't fight me. She was obedient, loving, and everything you refused to be." Panic surged through me as he edged closer, his demeanor growing more threatening with every step. "Sam, you can't seriously believe this," I said as the words struggled to get out of my mouth. "You tried to build a family?" He chuckled darkly, his eyes gleaming with something unhinged. "I did more than try. I succeeded." My heart pounded in my chest, but all I could think about now was getting out and getting my son and running as far away as possible. I bolted for the door, adrenaline kicking in. "You're not taking my son," he shouted. I slammed the door behind me, sprinting for the car, grabbing my boy before Sam could reach us. I booked me and Daniel into a hotel until I figured out what we were going to do next. My heart was still racing from the chaos we just escaped from. The room was quiet, a stark contrast to the horror that had unfolded at the house. For a moment, I allowed myself to breathe, to feel some relief. We were safe, away from Sam and his twisted creation. "Let's get you cleaned up, buddy," I said softly, trying to keep things normal for Daniel. He smiled up at me, innocent and unaware of the nightmare we'd just fled. I filled the tub with warm water and helped him in, watching as he relaxed, splashing happily. For the first time all day, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I sat on the edge of the tub, running my hand through his hair, grateful that we'd made it out together. But then something strange happened. Daniel's movements grew stiff and jerky. He stopped splashing, and his head tilted to the side in an unnatural way. My heart dropped. "Mommy, I don't feel good," he said, his voice distorted. Water fizzled around him, and I saw tiny, almost invisible sparks at first coming from his neck. "No," I whispered, backing away in horror. His skin began to peel, revealing metal and wires underneath. Sam hadn't just built the perfect wife. He was trying to build the perfect family. Story 2. The last message. I never really believed in paranormal things or anything like that. I'm the kind of person who would be the last to believe in such things. But what happened that night changed everything. It was around 10 p.m. I was comfortably settled on the couch, watching a series on Netflix. The soft light from the screen illuminated the room, while the silence of the house was broken only by the characters' voices. My phone was beside me when it suddenly vibrated. Instinctively, I picked it up and saw a message from an unknown number, a number that definitely wasn't in my contacts. Curiosity took over. When I opened the conversation, a wave of dread washed over me. "You are being watched." I tried to convince myself it was just my friends playing a prank, but the idea quickly faded when another message arrived. "Look out the window." I thought about ignoring it. It was just some random number, and the idea of looking outside felt absurdly risky. But a strange sensation, like a voice inside urging me to act, led me to rise. The night was dark, and I could see nothing beyond the shadows of my own bushes. Another message, "Now you don't see." Anxiety settled in my chest. I replied, almost pleading, "What do you want from me?" A quick response came, "Leave me alone." The tension escalated, as if the atmosphere around me were thickening. Then the next message made me freeze, "Come to the back door." My heart raced. Reluctantly, I walked to the back, the feeling of being watched growing with each step. I sent a message, "I'm here." The silence was deafening. With a courage I didn't know I had, I opened the door. My backyard was well lit, but darkness seemed to swallow everything around me. The air felt heavy, and there was a sweet, almost nauseating smell that made me uneasy. "Now you see," the message echoed in my mind. I looked into the darkness. At first, nothing. But then, something caught my eye in the bushes. I put on my glasses, trying to see better. What I saw made my blood run cold. A humanoid figure, distorted and shadowy, was there, watching me. Its eyes were not eyes at all, but deep voids that seemed to absorb the light. I felt a shiver run down my spine, and before I could react, the figure sprinted toward me. I slammed the door shut and locked it immediately, my heart pounding wildly. The thing banged on the door with a tremendous force, a sound echoing as if it were testing the house's resistance. Silence. I called the police while making sure all the windows were secure. I peeked through the peephole, but saw nothing. The darkness now felt denser, as if it were alive. The police arrived, but found nothing. Relief mixed with confusion made no sense. After they left, I couldn't sleep. What was that thing? What did it want? The messages continued to echo in my mind, like a constant whisper reminding me that I wasn't alone. The next day, I received another message, this one without warning. You thought you were free? The moment of peace I longed for never came. Days dragged on, and the messages kept coming. Sometimes they were just unsettling words, I am close or you cannot escape. But other times, they were distorted images, as if someone were trying to show me the very essence of terror. I knew I couldn't go on like this. I needed to find out what was happening. I started researching stories of hauntings, abductions, and strange sightings. I discovered accounts of people who had encountered similar figures, beings that seemed to feed off fear, hiding in the shadows, always watching. And always waiting. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone vibrated again. It was a message, you still don't understand. The air felt heavier, and the temperature dropped abruptly. A sense of despair overwhelmed me. I went to the window and looked outside. The darkness seemed to pulse, as if it were alive. And then I saw it. The figure, now closer, clearer. It was no longer just a shadow. It was a grotesque creature, with scaly skin and eyes that looked like two deep holes, empty and full of malice. The creature smiled, and I realized that the true terror was just beginning. In the back of my mind, a voice whispered, you should never have looked. I came to Reddit to seek help and advice on what to do. I can't sleep, with that feeling of being watched. That sinister smile is still in my head. If anyone has encountered that thing and managed to survive, please help me. Story 3. I led a secret mission during the Cold War. Today I expose what happened. My name is Captain James Jim Carter, and this is the account of Operation Black Frost. This story is not one for the faint-hearted, nor for those who seek comfort in the familiar. It's a tale of darkness, treachery, and the cold, unforgiving grip of fear that comes from confronting the unknown. In the winter of 1962, deep into the Cold War, I was part of a covert task force sent by the United States to infiltrate the frozen wilderness of Siberia. Our mission was to track down and eliminate a high-ranking Soviet official, Dmitry Ivanov, who was believed to be overseeing a top-secret government experiment. The nature of the experiment was unknown, but the little intelligence we had suggested it was a threat unlike anything we had encountered before. Our team consisted of 9 soldiers, each handpicked for their unique skills and unwavering resolve. There was Lieutenant John Johnny Rourke, my second in command, a man of few words but immense bravery. Sergeant William Bill Turner, a grizzled veteran with an encyclopedic knowledge of explosives. Corporal David Dave Hernandez, our communications expert, whose quick wit often lightened the mood. Private First Class Samuel Sammy Lee, a sharpshooter with nerves of steel. Private Gregory Greg Thompson, our medic, whose calm demeanor under pressure was a beacon of hope. Private Richard Rick Davis, a scout with an uncanny ability to navigate the harshest terrains. Private Andrew Andy Johnson, our engineer, capable of making or breaking anything mechanical. Finally, Private Robert Bobby Kim, a linguist and cryptographer, essential for deciphering Russian communications. We were dropped into the heart of Siberia under the cover of night, our breath visible in the frigid air as we trudged through knee-deep snow. The cold was merciless, cutting through our gear and chilling us to the bone. We moved swiftly and silently, each step taking us closer to our target and deeper into the unknown. Our journey began uneventfully, but as the days passed, an oppressive sense of dread settled over us. The forest around us seemed alive, the trees whispering secrets and shadows moving just out of sight. We had been trained to handle fear, but this was different. It was as if the very land was warning us to turn back. On the third night, we set up camp near an abandoned village, its dilapidated buildings standing as silent witnesses to some long-forgotten tragedy. As we huddled around a small fire, the wind howling outside, Dave picked up a faint transmission on his radio. It was in Russian, and Bobby quickly translated. It was a distress signal originating from within the village. Against our better judgment, we decided to investigate. The village was eerily quiet, our footsteps echoing off the crumbling walls. We followed the signal to a small church at the edge of the village. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of horror. Bodies, frozen and contorted in agony, lay strewn across the floor. Their eyes were wide with terror, mouths frozen mid-scream. At the altar, a lone figure sat slumped over, clutching a radio. It was a Soviet soldier, his face twisted in fear, fingers frozen to the bone. "What the hell happened here?" Rick muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," Johnny replied, his eyes scanning the shadows. As we turned to leave, the radio crackled to life. Static filled the room, followed by a voice, distorted and barely audible. "They are coming, the shadows." Before we could react, the church doors slammed shut, and the temperature plummeted. The shadows around us seemed to come alive, writhing and twisting as if possessed by some malevolent force. Panic set in, and we fired blindly into the darkness. The shadows dissipated, but not before claiming Sammy. He vanished into the darkness, his screams echoing long after he was gone. We fled the village, our morale shattered and our numbers reduced. The forest seemed more hostile than ever, the shadows watching our every move. We pressed on, driven by duty and the need for answers. Days turned into weeks, and our supplies dwindled. The cold was relentless, sapping our strength and will to continue. Then, we found it, a hidden facility, buried deep within the mountains. It was heavily guarded, but we were determined to complete our mission. Under the cover of darkness, we infiltrated the facility. What we found inside was beyond comprehension. It was a laboratory, filled with strange devices and jars containing grotesque specimens. The air was thick with the stench of decay and chemicals. At the center of it all was Dmitry Ivanov, overseeing an experiment that defied all logic. He was using the shadows themselves, harnessing their malevolent energy to create weapons of unimaginable power. The shadows were alive, feeding on fear and pain, growing stronger with each passing moment. We attempted to sabotage the facility, but the shadows fought back. One by one, my men were taken. Bill was torn apart by unseen forces, his screams filling the air. Greg was dragged into the darkness, his fate unknown. Rick and Andy were consumed by the shadows, their bodies disappearing without a trace. Dave and Bobby fought valiantly, but they too fell to the relentless onslaught. In the end, it was just Johnny and me. We confronted Ivanov, but he was beyond reason, consumed by the power he had unleashed. In a final act of desperation, Johnny detonated the explosives we had planted, destroying the facility and the horrors within. I barely escaped, my body battered and broken. I wandered through the snow for days, the shadows still haunting my every step. Eventually, I was found by a Soviet patrol and taken prisoner. They never believed my story, and I spent years in a Siberian gulag, haunted by the memories of that fateful mission. The gulag was a place of misery and despair, but it was nothing compared to the horrors I had faced in that cursed forest. The other prisoners were hardened criminals, spies, and political dissidents, but even they sensed that something was different about me. They kept their distance, whispering about the haunted American who spoke of shadows and unseen terrors. Years passed in a blur of hard labor, starvation, and the bitter cold. The guards took pleasure in our suffering, and any sign of weakness was met with brutal punishment. I learned to keep my head down, to endure the pain and the fear. But no matter how much I tried to bury the memories, the shadows were always there, lurking at the edges of my vision, whispering in the dead of night. One particularly harsh winter, when the cold was so intense it felt like knives slicing through our flesh, I befriended a fellow prisoner named Sergei. He was a former KGB operative, a man of few words but with eyes that spoke volumes. He had seen things that made my stories of shadows seem almost mundane. We formed an unspoken bond, finding solace in each other's company amidst the relentless bleakness of the Gulag. One night, as we huddled together for warmth in our barracks, Sergei leaned in and whispered to me, "I believe you, Jim. About the shadows. I've seen them too." I stared at him, searching his eyes for any hint of deceit, but found only sincerity. What do you mean? Before I was imprisoned here, I was part of an operation similar to yours, Sergei explained. We were sent to investigate a remote research facility in the Ural Mountains. What we found there, it was beyond comprehension. The scientists were experimenting with something they called Project Knocknoisver, the Night Beast. They were trying to harness the energy of the shadows, to create weapons that could strike fear into the hearts of our enemies. My blood ran cold as he spoke. What happened to your team? They were all taken, Sergei said, his voice barely above a whisper. The shadows consumed them, one by one. I barely escaped with my life, just like you. But I was captured and thrown into this hellhole, and no one believed my story. As Sergei spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. If there was another facility, another project like Ivanov's, then we had to find it. We had to stop it, once and for all. The shadows could not be allowed to spread their darkness any further. Sergei, we have to get out of here, I said, my voice filled with determination. We have to find that facility and destroy it. Sergei nodded, his eyes gleaming with a newfound resolve. But how? This place is a fortress. Escape is nearly impossible. We'll find a way, I replied. We have to. The next few weeks were a blur of planning and preparation. We gathered what little resources we could, bartering with other prisoners for tools and information. It was dangerous work, and more than once we came close to being discovered by the guards. But desperation drove us forward, the knowledge that we were the only ones who could stop the shadows from spreading their terror. Finally, the night of our escape arrived. A brutal snowstorm raged outside, providing the perfect cover for our plan. Under the guise of a routine work detail, we managed to slip away from the main camp, making our way towards the outer perimeter. The cold was intense, sapping our strength with every step, but we pressed on, driven by the knowledge that failure was not an option. We reached the outer fence, a towering barrier of barbed wire and electrified steel. Using the tools we had painstakingly gathered, we managed to cut our way through, slipping into the frozen wilderness beyond. The storm battered us mercilessly, but it also covered our tracks, buying us precious time. For days, we traveled through the snow, surviving on whatever scraps of food we could find. The shadows were ever present, watching, waiting. But Sergei and I were determined, refusing to give in to the fear that gnawed at our minds. Finally, we reached the Ural Mountains, their jagged peaks rising like silent sentinels against the sky. Sergei led the way, his knowledge of the terrain guiding us to the hidden facility. As we approached, a sense of dread settled over me, the memories of that fateful mission flooding back in vivid detail. The facility was much like the one we had encountered in Siberia, an ominous structure of concrete and steel, hidden deep within the mountains. We watched from a distance, observing the guards and the routine of the compound. It was heavily fortified, but we were prepared to face whatever dangers lay within. Under the cover of darkness, we made our move, slipping past the outer defenses and into the heart of the facility. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of chemicals and decay. We crept through the dimly lit corridors, our hearts pounding in our chests. The shadows seemed to grow darker, more malevolent, as we neared the central chamber. And there, at the center of it all, we found him, Dmitry Ivanov, the architect of this madness. He stood before a massive machine, its mechanisms pulsating with a sickly, otherworldly light. The air crackled with energy, the shadows swirling around him like a living shroud. "You should not have come here," Ivanov said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "You cannot stop what has already been set in motion." "We'll see about that," I replied, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at my insides. As we moved to sabotage the machine, the shadows attacked, lashing out with tendrils of darkness that sought to envelop us. Sergei and I fought desperately, our bullets seemingly ineffective against the intangible foe. The shadows fed off our fear, growing stronger with each passing moment. In the chaos, Sergei was dragged into the darkness, his screams echoing through the chamber. I fought on, determined to finish what we had started. With a final, desperate act, I managed to overload the machine, causing it to explode in a blinding flash of light. The shadows recoiled, their hold on reality weakening. But as the facility began to collapse around me, I realized the true horror of our situation. The shadows were not defeated, they were merely contained. And with Ivanov's death, their malevolence was unleashed upon the world. I barely escaped the facility, stumbling through the snow as the mountain trembled and collapsed behind me. I wandered for days, the shadows still haunting my every step. Eventually, I was found by a rescue team, my body battered and broken, my mind shattered by the horrors I had witnessed. I was brought back to the United States, where I was debriefed and then quietly discharged. They tried to bury the truth, to silence me with threats and promises. But I know the shadows are still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, as I sit here in the quiet solitude of my home, I can feel them watching me. The shadows are always watching, always waiting. And once they have marked you, there is no escape. Story 4. The previous owner of my house was deathly afraid of meat. The house was beautiful. It was like a dream. 2 stories, 2 bathrooms, 2 beds, the living room dropped down like in the 70s, and the kitchen was complete with an island and a beautiful view of the garden and a large, towering apple tree. There was even some decor left by the previous residents, little bird feeders, a stone Buddha by the front step, a tree of life tapestry hanging in the living room. The realtor had told my parents the previous resident wouldn't be needing these things back, but she would remove them before we moved in, but my parents told her not to. It made the space feel cozy and lived in. We moved in at the beginning of summer, so I didn't have to worry about school for a while. It was nice to have no additional stress, but it made me sad to have those months free without much opportunity to see my friends. I found myself worrying about what they were doing, if they were having more fun without me, if they'd already forgotten I existed. It didn't take long for me to realize, moving was lonely. I spent my summer in the garden, pretending I was a forlorn maiden, cast away from everything she knows. I lay in the cool dirt beneath the apple tree, watching the leaves flutter in the warm breeze. Sometimes I would even eat an apple, but they were always a bit too bitter for my taste. I would wonder about the sliver in the wood, like someone had hacked at it with an axe, then gave up. Who would try and chop down such a beautiful thing? That apple tree became a sort of sanctuary. The shade protected me from the blazing sun on the hotter days, and the trunk became an incredibly comfortable backrest to lean back on and read. One day, while I was doing just that, something blew up against my leg. A dirty, stained piece of paper. I set my book down and picked it up, curious. I scanned it quickly. It looked like a letter, from what I could make out, but it cut off at the end, and there was no backside. I shifted from my spot against the tree, digging my fingers into the soft dirt and searching around. I thought that if this letter had been here, maybe, just maybe, the rest were too. I was desperate for excitement at that point, and I wasn't beyond getting my hands dirty to find some. Sure enough, soon my fingers were prying at dampened notebook paper, carefully edging it out of the soil. I think I found most of them just searching in the dirt, they weren't buried very deep. As soon as I finished reading those letters, I went to find my parents, heaving. We left that house, and we never came back. I'll do my best to relay to you what the letters said. At least, what I could read of it. Dear Sylvia, I miss you the worst in summer. The winter here is cold and unforgiving, but the summer is worse. I cannot even bring myself to leave the house anymore. I fear some days that death follows me, like a stray dog nipping at my heel. Now that you and Elsie are gone from my life, I have nothing left to run from. How could I be meant to stay here when you were not? Even so, I feel very strongly that dying now would be a betrayal to you, no matter how much I would love to join you, wherever you are. My days are lonely and plain now. I eat nothing but what I can take from the garden. Thank you for my nourishment and my survival, my dear wife. There isn't much flavor to my food without the smell of you cooking it in the kitchen. I think often of my time as a butcher. I used to be happy with that kind of work, but now it only disgusts me. The thought of slicing through meat that was once a living creature, nearly brings me to tears. Some nights, when I close my eyes, all I can see is muscles twitching. It haunts me in your absence. I swear, Sylvia, I will never consume that stuff again. The apple tree is the only piece of you I have left. The only living piece. I could go catatonic for hours, just watching it sway. When I see that tree, I feel that you're nearby. I miss you. R. Dear Sylvia. Yesterday I went to sit under our tree. It pains me that when you were alive, I didn't spend much time in our garden. Perhaps I had old hermit in my blood, even then. I preferred to watch you from the kitchen, admiring your gardening prowess from a distance. Perhaps that makes me a bad husband, but I think you like that about me. How I always gave you enough space. It's nice out here. Very peaceful. The fresh air feels like you, touching me. I could have sworn I could hear Elsie's laughter in the breeze. I noticed something strange, as I sat against the trunk, enjoying the sunshine on my skin. It felt like the tree moved against my back, almost as if it were squirming. Perhaps my mind is not what it used to be. But perhaps it was you. If it was you, thank you. I hope you'll reach out again. That night, I had a very hard time falling asleep. No matter what I did, I could not feel comfortable. My bed felt wrong, felt lumpy and strange, as if it were not made for me. I gave up and went to our kitchen, and I watched the tree through the window until my eyes grew heavy. It was so beautiful in the moonlight, glowing gently, drawing the eye. It was so quiet, so dignified. It made me feel uneasy, but in a comforting way, as odd as that may sound. When I got back to bed, it didn't feel wrong anymore, and I was finally able to rest. R. Dear Sylvia. These days, all I find myself doing is wandering the house, reminiscing. I don't dare move or change anything. I want to preserve everything just the way you left it. Our house is covered in little trinkets, hippie things that I don't entirely understand. You always had such an earthly style. Some of it I don't care for, it simply isn't my cup of tea, but I never would have told you that. I would never want to step on your toes. It's apple season again. I remember watching you and Elsie climb our tree, shrieking and laughing uproariously as you hung from the branches like monkeys. Elsie, my little monkey. I know she never cared for that nickname when I called her it, but it stuck. You were such a good mother, Sylvia. I hope you knew I knew that. I used to love apple season. I loved watching you pick them, dropping the ripe ones into wicker baskets in the grass, and a couple of days later, the entire house would smell of pie, sweet cinnamon and sugar, and it would linger for days, even all the way up in the attic. This is something I miss dearly. Please come back, Sylvia, and bake one last apple pie. R. Dear Sylvia. Today I went out to pick apples. I thought maybe I could take a crack at your old apple pie recipe, perhaps treat myself to something besides wilted vegetables. However, something very strange and disturbing happened to me. I was collecting the ones that looked the ripest. I am not the most well-versed in things like this, but I can make an educated guess. I found one that looked so perfect. It was red and shiny, not a scratch on it or a single warm hole, which felt lucky. I went to take a bite, and what I found caused me to vomit into the grass. Inside of the apple was meat. Raw meat. It was not quite the kind of meat I used to butcher, although it twitched as such. I could see white muscles and tendon. It oozed with pink plasma where my teeth had parted the skin. It tasted metallic and rotten on my tongue. The flavor still hasn't passed. I cut open every single apple one had picked. The tree seemed to shudder. They were all like that. Made of meat. Some entirely, and some as if a rot was spreading over them. I can't help but wonder how long it has been this way. I feel unnerved. I feel that I can't trust my brain, my vision, or my taste buds. I feel I may vomit again. I do not know if what I experienced is real, but if it was, I do not know what to do. It is unholy, what I have experienced. Tonight, I will pray. R. Dear Sylvia. Today, someone knocked on the door. I was still feeling shaken up and disoriented, so this caused my nerves to be completely shot. I do not enjoy interacting with strangers, or anyone, for that matter. It was a man, and he was carrying a box. He asked me for you, and for Elsie. I told this man that you had not lived here for a while. He seemed confused, so I clarified that I was your husband and Elsie was my daughter, and you had both passed away in a tragic accident. That caused him to look even more confused. Forgive me, but I felt defensive and uncomfortable. I figured maybe this man looked so confused because I am old, and you were younger. Oh, how I wish I could rid this planet of all judgment. This man seemed as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He left then. He did not give me the box, which I assume was meant for you. Perhaps he was a coworker of yours, or an old friend, or maybe even just a mailman. I feel sorry that he had to hear the news from me, even despite my disdain. I cried today. I didn't dare go back out to the tree, but I wanted to. I feel as if I may be losing my mind. That interaction with that man at the door made me feel unnerved. I wish he had not come. I only wish to be with you again. My bed feels strange and alien. It feels too soft, and I swear something smells rotten. Perhaps an animal has gotten trapped in the walls and died. I cannot sleep. Dear Sylvia. The smell of rot has become unbearable. I cannot live this way. When I sleep, what you could barely call sleep, I see you. I dream of that first day I saw you and my daughter, climbing that tree in your garden, how I watched from the street. I watched you climb and play and laugh, and you looked so happy, so holy. I saw that underneath this happiness was a lonely woman. I was drawn to you as if to a flame, the only warmth in a cold, barren life. I was drawn to you so quickly, and I knew you were all that was right, and I only wanted you, and I only wanted our daughter. It was you or nothing at all. You or the cold. And then these dreams twist and turn into nightmares, and I'm brought back to the day of your death. How you knew you would leave me before I did, and you looked at me with tears in your beautiful brown eyes. All I pray for is a chance to go back, although I know it isn't possible. I know if I could go back, something would be different. I could save you from yourself and Elsie, too. You wouldn't have to die. The smell of rot has become unbearable. I am too afraid to look out the window and see the tree. I am too afraid to see it moving. Something is alive in that tree. I feel it in my bones. It is watching me. I fear it is not just the tree that is alive. Dear Sylvia. I have ripped apart our bed. Forgive me. I couldn't bear it. All I have found is more meat. It throbs and stinks. I have been sleeping on top of sopping, rotting flesh. I have destroyed our beautiful home. I have ripped apart the sofas and the carpet, and I have smashed the plates, and all I have found is flesh. Flesh and cracking bone. It is alive. It is all alive, and moving. It wishes to swallow me. I am being condemned. I am sorry, Sylvia. I'm sorry Elsie found me in the attic that day. I'm sorry you were so afraid. If only you had known I only had good in my heart, and love for you. If only I could sleep above you and listen to you snore once more. If only I could watch you one more time out of your kitchen window in the summer, you with our daughter, so oblivious, glowing with ignorant joy. I could have made you happy in that way, and more. I loved you, Sylvia, and you loved me. I remember how we fought, a few days after I told you you couldn't leave until we worked everything out. How you called me sick. If I am the one who is sick, why am I the one still breathing? It is all made of meat. It sickens me. It makes me want to scream, and vomit, and bash my head into the wall. It is all wrong, it is all rot. I can't help but feel that you're doing this to me on purpose. Do you want me to join you so badly that you would haunt my every waking hour? I hear sirens now. The blue and red lights flash against the throbbing, crimson walls. They twitch with glee at my suffering, at my terror. I will go to the garden with my axe, the last thing you saw with mortal eyes. I will chop down our tree, and I know what I will find inside. I will find meat. I will bury these letters for you, in the dirt above your head, and I will chop it down, so that you cannot haunt me any longer. And if they try and stop me, I will take them with me. They will not take my wife and my daughter from me again, nor me away from them. That was the trouble in the first place. I will see you soon, my dear. R.